Hey, seventh grade. We need to finish our slides about uh, chapter 14, section 1. So we still need to talk about feudalism, about Catholicism, and about European geography. So we'll see how long this takes. I don't know. Um, so Sebastian, Sebastian's playing his music again. Ooh, I kind of like this. Oh, he turned it off. Wrong Charlemagne, Sebastian. Come on. Jeez, when you live down the street from your teacher, all kinds of crazy things happen. Um, Anyways, before Sebastian distracted us, we did have a point that I needed to cover, and this is about the role of monks and nuns and priests in Europe. So I said one reason that the church was so well respected in Europe is because a lot of people depended on the church and its institutions and the education of its leaders in order to provide important social and legal and medical and spiritual services in the really chaotic time that happened after the Roman Empire fell and then after Charlemagne died and created a power vacuum. Right, so that's one reason that the church did very well in Europe. Another reason the church thrived in Europe during this period is because the church provided an alternative lifestyle that a lot of the poor were tempted to embrace. Right, so monasteries and convents provided a little bit of potential safety and security and even education and a little tiny bit of power for a impoverished person in Europe that they might be able to participate in. Right? So if you didn't want to grow up as a poor serf or farmer, it was possible, not likely, but possible that you would be able to enter a monastery or a convent. Now, usually, admittance to a monastery or convent was reserved for people whose families could contribute to the monastery or convent in some way. But they did also accept people who really couldn't pay. Now, of course, if you're going to live your life as a monk or a nun or a priest, you have to devote your entire life to serving the church. Right? So this wasn't an attractive option to everyone. It's just that for many people, they saw the life they would lead as a priest or a monk or a nun as a better alternative to living as a poor serf or peasant or farmer. Now, I do want to make a quick note about other Christian religions that existed at this time. In the late Middle Ages, especially after the Great Schism with the Byzantine Empire, we have significant numbers of Christians who are not Catholic. So, for example, we have Coptic Christians in Africa who are not a part of the Catholic Church. And of course, we have the Eastern Orthodox Christians. But the Catholic Church is unique at this time and was the most powerful at this time, in part because it was the only Christian church that could claim authority for itself based on direct apostolic succession. Remember from our study of the Byzantines and, of course, ecclesiology and things we've talked about in the religion class, apostolic succession is the authority that the apostles passed down to Jesus. So Jesus gave authority to the apostles, and the apostles passed that authority down to their successors, who passed it down to their successors, and the successors of the apostles are the bishops, right? So the church could claim direct apostolic succession going all the way back to St. Peter. And it actually had documents showing, okay, this bishop in this part of Europe was ordained by this bishop, who was ordained by this bishop. And some of these documents went back, had chains going back for centuries. And of course, with the popes, we still have chain that goes all the way back to St. Peter. So this claim that the Catholic Church made helped it become the dominant religion in the Western world at this time, dominant over the Eastern Orthodox, who are of course in the East, but also dominant over like Coptics and other Christians who are in the West. All right, moving on to feudalism now. So we know from our study of Japan what feudalism is. So here is a European version of the definition of feudalism. Feudalism is a social and economic system where you have landowning lords who grant pieces of land called fiefdoms to people who are called vassals. So in Japan, we have daimyos who grant land or protection, etc., to peasants who would live under their authority. It's the same thing happening in Europe. The difference is we have different terminology, right? So the land that the lords would give out, the lords, of course, are not called daimyos in Europe. They're just called lords. The land they would give out is called fiefdoms, and the people they would give their fiefdoms to, their servants, are called vassals. So a vassal is a man who pledges to serve their lord as a knight. Right? So a vassal would be analogous to not a peasant, but to a samurai. Right? And just like the samurai followed the Bushido code, vassals, if they served as knights, would follow the code of chivalry, which we'll talk about later. Right? So under feudalism, peasants and serfs farm on either a knight's land or on the landowning lord's land. They don't own the land, but they were usually allowed to live on the land and to keep a part of the harvest for themselves. And then the rest of the harvest, and sometimes other things that the peasants or serfs would make in their homes, would be paid to the landowner as their rent or as taxes, because most peasants didn't actually have their hands on actual money. So to pay their rent, they had to pay the lord with crops or with other goods that they would make. So just like in Japan, these feudal lords provide protection from the chaos outside. They also would provide a system of justice on their estate. So a lot of these feudal lords, just like in Japan, became extremely powerful and owned a lot of land, right? And then they would loan soldiers or land or money to kings or queens and become even more powerful because now they would have the king or queen owing them something, which is a big deal, right? So these lords create the foundation for what's going to become the nations of Europe. Nations like France and Germany and Italy and England. Right? These were created by feudalism, by these landowning lords. All right, so under feudalism, European society is organized along a pretty strict hierarchy. So at the top of the society, you have the king. No, the Pope, quick note about the Pope. The Pope is located in Rome, which is far away from most of the kingdoms that feudalism existed in. But people inside the kingdoms of Europe viewed the Pope as an equal to the king. But this didn't really matter unless there was tension between the Pope and the king. Some kings had some squabbles with the popes, and so depending on who you saw as being an authority, whether the Pope or the king, there might be consequences for you because of that. But for the most part, most kings and most popes were okay as being seen as on equal footing at the top of society. The second level, we would have the most powerful nobles and also leaders of the church. So leaders of the church would be cardinals or bishops. And then the most powerful nobles would be the nobles who are the wealthiest or who have the most soldiers. The third level of society, we have the weaker nobles and some other important figures in the church. Maybe not cardinals or bishops, but these would be those in charge of the convents and the monasteries. These would be called priors. Some priests and even some deacons would be at this level as well, just like really powerful clergy members who are not bishops yet. Below the weaker nobles and these important church figures are knights. Right? Now, knights are kind of unique because knights can move up the ranks of society pretty quickly by befriending the most important nobles or bishops or cardinals or even the kings. Right? So a knight can go from being at like the fourth level of society to like the second level of society pretty easily. Even if you're a low ranking knight, if you serve well, you might be elevated to like that second level, being a very powerful noble. The fifth level of society would be low ranking clergy. So these would be your everyday priests, monks, or nuns. These are people that maybe are important in their local community, but within broader society, nobody really pays attention to them. And at the bottom, we have peasants and serfs. So technically, peasants would be ranked above serfs because a peasant is not bound to serve a lord or to live on the lord's land. A peasant can own their own property. A serf is someone who lives on the lord's land or lives on a knight's land and has to serve that knight or lord. It's just that in general, we lump peasants and serfs together because in reality, the distinction between the two was not very significant. All right. European geography comes next. We're not going to get through all of it. You know what? I'm going to stop here and then I'm going to make another video where I talk about geography.